there's the cautionary tale of those. They are all written either frivolously or without all the facts or an understanding of the context. And so if nothing else you take out of this after the don't put safety in monetary terms rule, don't use apocalyptic language or gallows humor, literally, in memos. And most of you don't see it that often, but I'm always surprised when stuff comes up. Another problem with bad document creation is when we're upset, we don't wait to respond. Sometimes you might not be able to wait because there's an actual emergent issue, but rarely is that the case. In our law firm, we called it the 48-hour rule, and that is, I'm upset. I think this person misses the point, and I want to tell them that not only are they wrong, they are being rude or whatever. I mean, you're just mad about it, right? And the rule was just stop, right? Just stop and don't write anything until you think about it a while. You read the email a couple times, or understand if it wasn't an email, maybe somebody told you what was going on. Then it's, of course, how reliable is that? And just let it sit for a while. This may seem so basic, it's incredible, but it's just amazes me how people think they have to shoot off a response that is not only corrective, but offensive. And that's never helpful because everybody has emotions. Good employees have emotion, they care. So that's not the point, right? We don't want to be robots, but you got to take time. And it can eliminate a lot of bad documents if you just take that time and think about it. Unless it actually is an emergency, then address the actual problem, not what you think of the person, right? You can deal with what you think of the person later. Excuse me. So a corollary rule is probably one mistake we make, we write instead of talk. Back in earlier in my career the rule was walk down the hall and ask, hey, I got this email and can you explain it to me? And can we talk it through so I really understand what you meant? Or I got this email, this is really upsetting. I think it's wrong. Go find a confidant or somebody you can talk to say, hey, am I reading this right? And if you're not supposed to share it with that person, maybe just say, try to build some context around it verbally that's not recorded anywhere. Even a phone call, right? And don't leave a voice message. Voice messages are documents, ultimately. And talk to somebody and say, or the person who wrote it and say, geez, I just got this, and you're in the California office and they're in Minneapolis or whatever. And can we just walk through this so I understand what we're doing here? Because it seems like I don't quite understand it. And maybe if we do that and then deal with it that way. Again, maybe if you're really upset, waiting a while to do that, unless it has to be addressed immediately. So picking up the phone, going to somebody's office, if you're in that context and not working from home mostly, can be helpful. And writing an email that says, I'm not sure I understand what you're saying is not helpful sometimes. It just adds more, it heightens the scrutiny and the tension, right? Because the other person will read that like, this person thinks I'm an idiot, and instead of an actual honest inquiry, right? And so in writing an actual honest inquiry can take a long time because you're always asking person to interpret it instead of if you're just talking to them on the phone or a Teams call or a Zoom call or whatever, then you can say, go through whatever the questions are raised by a particular email, document, report, or whatever it is, draft of a report, whatever that's creating the issue. A lot of people write things before they're sure they know what the facts are or they understand the facts. Again, a corollary rule of what we just talked about, right? I can't believe how many people, and I probably do. Matter of fact, I do it more often than I'm afraid to admit, even in personal communications. I misread things. I don't think about context or where it's coming from. I don't know all the facts. And sometimes I'll respond, even though the response is sort of innocuous and not a problem. I shouldn't respond, right? I should say, let me think about this, or I'll get back to you, or can we talk about this? Or worse yet, you don't want to write reports that are going to be deemed as facts when they're not, when you're not sure about them. That should seem obvious, right? Especially in the scientific realm we operate in when we're talking about medical devices, food safety, whatever it is, drugs, clinical trials, whatever. You would think you would never write anything without really understanding the context, but um, that's something that's a problem. Finally, making conclusions without knowing the facts. Sometimes we just extrapolate too far, right? The conclusions that we make from A plus B are maybe easy to be C, but then beyond that, we don't have the facts, right? And what are facts, right? So we'll talk about that a little more, but is it something you actually know? And we'll talk about what knowing means in a minute. And are they actually facts? So when you get something, maybe a person you trust, they send you information, you go, well, it must be true. Do you know really that it is? So we tend to take things for granted sometimes, and lots of times you can. If you're dealing with a tight-knit team that's working on a specific problem, everybody's honest in it, and you can be quick and agile, and you don't have to worry about this. But sometimes that's not the case. So some other ones, poor nomenclature. I run into this a lot especially when we're evaluating testing to determine what caused a product to not perform as we hoped, or we're analyzing whether in light of what we've learned about that, there should be a recall. In light of something some employee said about the problem with the document or payment methods or things like that, where we think a problem's being raised, right? Well, we know a problem's being raised, but we tend to run right to things that in writing that say this is a super high risk, and if we have defective products, it would be unethical to have them on the market a minute longer because we could cause injury and it'd be our fault. Well, you might not even know what's going on yet, right? Or much more benign things. I've had documents which are analysis of what's going on from a research and development perspective about something that's happening in the field, where words are used such as failure and defective and things like that, where that's what we're trying to find out. We're not making any conclusions about that. Now, I understand the scientific proposition of testing things to failure, but that's a specific term of art in that context. That's not a adjective, right? Or something to describe a conclusion about what's going on, especially if we haven't reached that conclusion yet. So that happens a lot. Just the lesson there is just look at your language, right? And even though the inquiry might be around what you might characterize as failure or something like that, try to be a little careful about the language that goes back and forth between, say, clinicians in the company, patients in the company, regulators in the company, about how you describe things. Because while the two people talking might understand the language and the context within which it's written, other people later might not, and they'll just see bad words, right? Or bad in the context of a liability case or a fraud case or something like that. So that's the important thing there. Not paying attention to privilege or privacy or confidentiality in document retention rules. That is ignoring all the things we talked about last week, and you just make things public that shouldn't be, right? You're sharing it inappropriately. We talked about all that. I don't expect people ever do that hardly intentionally, but they're just maybe not careful with what pathways the pathways through which they're communicating, or what devices they're using, or not taking the time to follow the company rules regarding those things. And that's a discipline issue that, again, when you're moving fast, is sometimes hard to follow or even learn if you're new to it. Being personal in a negative manner. It's one thing to say, great meeting today, it's great to talk to you, really brought some good ideas. Well, I didn't agree with some of them, but that's the kind of thinking we need, instead of course, I can't believe you raised that stuff. It seemed to be incredibly out of context and not helpful, and right, just impugning the person's integrity and intelligence or whatever. So we all know we should be respectful, and that's rule number one. It's really hard in trial to talk about intra-company squabbles where people are being personal. It's easy to talk about intercompany disagreements because they happen. That's how things push forward. You identify an issue, you talk about the issue, you file a pathway to a resolution of the issue. And even if you pick the wrong resolution, it might not be bad in a liability context, as long as it's well thought out, whatever it is based on the science, and you deal with it. But things that are, it'll reflect very negatively on the company if there's not respect shown amongst employees, leadership, and whoever's involved. And then assuming your document is confidential, we talked about that. They're not, right? Somebody's gonna someday read them. If they don't, you're lucky. So those are bad practices in document creation and conduct. And again, I want to emphasize the writing is conduct, right? It's not just writing. So what are good habits? What are things you should do to make sure when you communicate within the company, you're doing it in a way that reflects well on the company and gets the job done? I mean, that's why people call the lawyers the no department, or the get nothing done department, or the no sales department. Well, we actually are trying to create, at least in this context, document regime that hopefully makes things more efficient and keeps people focused on what's at hand. And what's at hand, it's doing business, helping people, and making a profit. So the first one is the communication necessary, i.e. does it meet a business need? A business need can be, we should get together for lunch. That's a business need. You need to create teams. You need to create, a good working environment. So I'm not trying to suggest that if it's not about a quality control person, or a quality control issue, or a legal issue, or a accounting issue, or a sales issue, or marketing, that doesn't mean it's still not meeting a business need. It could be planning a birthday gathering in the office or something. Those are business needs. You live in a community of humans. You don't have to dehumanize it to make it still be a business need. But business needs might not be, I went out with my buddies last night, we got really hammered, so I'm moving kind of slow today. Maybe not necessary to even talk about why you're tired. You could talk about it, but don't write about it. How's that? Maybe a better way to look at it. Accuracy is always important. Is it true, and is it a fair reflection on what happened, the people involved, and things like that. It's amazing what people will write and they don't know whether it's true or not, or they go beyond to speculate, right? They've written what's true, excuse me, without being prompted. They say more than they need to say. So it's important to write what's accurate and not create a world, an imaginary world of what might have happened by speculating about things. We already talked about be appropriate, be aware of humor and sarcasm and inflammatory opinions. You can have strong opinions, right? It's good to have them. You should care, but be careful how you go about that, right? I'm really upset that this is happening and I want to talk to somebody about it instead of just ripping off a long email about all the things that are wrong. Go talk to somebody about it first. And in most companies, there's a recordable, proper way to get those issues fleshed out, heard first, and then fleshed out. Be understandable, use plain language, and include important context. So this is more flesh on the be true and fair and concise. It's, don't try to sound too intellectual. Don't use pejorative language or language that people wouldn't understand, or culturally insensitive language. And that can be culturally young, old, race, not race, gender, whatever. Just don't. Unless it's a specific subject matter of an issue like clinical trials. Well, it'd be nice to have more of these people in because it'll be better. We'll give a better understanding of the medicine's use over different types of people or something like that. That's different. So anyway, make communication as simple as possible and easy for people to understand. Be succinct and do not include extraneous information that may be confusing to later readers. I already talked about that. I don't need to say anything more about that than I've already said. Deliver it correctly only to those who need the communication. In other words, you got to think about who needs to hear what you have to hear, right? Sometimes most of the time, that's probably very straightforward. You have a group of people you're working on a project with, or a particular issue, or you're getting ready for an inspection and you have a team that does that, or whatever it might be. So it's pretty clear, but don't include people that don't need to know. They might not know what to do with the information. They might pass on the information. They might, and further miscommunicate the information if they don't understand all the things we just talked about, being succinct and concise. And if they don't have context because they haven't been part of the sort of ongoing issue that's the subject of the communication, then why do they need to know? So, there are reporting lines. I understand that. You have to follow those. So you may be sending the communications up the chain because they need to be, because even though that person might not be working with you on a daily basis on what you're working on, they still need to have the communication because it's a marker of where you are, and so they can weigh in on progress, whatever you're working on. So that is the make sure it's delivered correctly, and also, the right addresses, the right machines, the right things. It's all done on business platforms that relate to the business and not outside them. Yeah, do not use personal accounts. We already talked about. Do not write what you don't understand or disagree with. I should clarify that. So if you disagree with things, you can write about it, obviously. But if you don't understand it first, before you disagree, that would be a clearer way to state that, and I apologize. But yeah, so if you don't really understand it and you're not sure, don't send off a response other than if it's yeah, we should talk about this. I'm not quite sure what you mean by these things. And, when we meet on Tuesday, I'd like to go through that. And if you want to talk sooner, give me a call, whatever, that's fine. But just don't say you disagree if you're not sure what you're disagreeing with. So that's the lesson there. If you feel uneasy, do not write. So if you're going, oh my God, I'm not sure how this person's going to take this, and I'm not really 100% sure if I understand, or this is really serious, right? Suddenly we're in a place I didn't think we would be in terms of what I view as how the company's conducting itself, or at least not the company, but the people, from whom you heard the news that makes you upset or uneasy. Don't write. Go talk to somebody. Go find out. Think about it for a while. My spouse, who investigates employment claims and runs into conduct that you wouldn't believe, you think this stuff might be fanciful. Her world is unbelievable. And in any event, it's a tummy test, she calls it. Just don't write. Wait a while. And if it's something that's emergent, call your manager. Boy, I just got this, and it looks like we're going to be doing this, and that really is not what we talked about. That's not really consistent with the whatever plans in place or process. And talk to that person verbally, on the phone or whatever, and say, am I reading this right? Do I have this right? Or, I want to understand this. So anyway, stick to the facts. So this is what I want to talk about in terms of what knowledge and facts mean. Imagine you are being deposed. What do you really know? So when I talk to people of getting ready for depositions, we talk about, well, what if I don't remember, they say, and I go, you remember things differently every time you remember them. It's just the way the mind works. That's why eyewitness testimony is notoriously a problem. So you got to be careful about your memory of a conversation or what somebody told you 3 days ago or whatever it is. So that's memory. The other part is knowledge. What do I really know? In other words, did I see it, smell it, hear it myself? Was it directed to me? I mean, how do I know it? Sometimes it might be, I read it in a document. I know what was written in the document. That's true. I can read that and it says whatever it says. But do I really know what it means? So when we talk about knowledge in the context of a deposition, we're talking about, is it your personal information that you know directly? So, that's a concept in fraud, and whether you're involved or not involved, and whether the information is useful for whistleblower purposes or not, is how you know it. Were you involved in it? So before you pass on information, right, how do I know this? You need to ask yourself. And do I know it? Or did I just hear it from people? And I'm not sure about the context. And so I didn't see that report. I didn't see that happening in the manufacturing process. Or maybe you did. So then you do know it. But that's an important concept that I think people lose sight of, is what do they really know before they start writing things down. And half of it turns out to be sort of accurate, but not quite in context. And then it has to be unwound. And I don't think that advances people's or the company's business's goals very well if you're dealing and people communicating about things they don't really know about and reporting about it or complaining about it or whatever. Doesn't mean you shouldn't raise complaints. You should always raise complaints because they're important to work out, but it's how you do it that we're talking about here. So here's the last one's really important that companies do badly. That is appropriately responding to complaints and recording what that response was. So lots of companies hear a concern of an employee and they're very concerned about that employee's observations or whatever it is. And they take it seriously and they talk to the person and interview them and say, oh my gosh, what's going on here? We really want to know what's happening. And So we want to develop a plan for addressing it. And you can help us, right? Because we have to have a plan that addresses the specific problems and the facts that are on the ground. And they do all that right, but they don't record sometimes exactly what they did. They don't write back to the employee and say, we talked to you, and as a result of that discussion, we talked to some other people. We came up with this plan. Here is the plan. The plan is to do X, Y, Z to address your concerns. And now you have a writing that says, we heard you, we gathered information, we came up with a solution. We reported back to the person. That person said, boy, that's great, right? And if they didn't respond, you might want to call them and say, you okay with this, right? Now you can't coddle every complaint. You can't, right? You have to pick and choose sometimes, depending on what's actually important. But most companies want to hear from their employees, want to address concerns. And the problem is they don't record it. So a good document practice is take credit for what you've resolved. And that really looks great when you're dealing with with the documents and litigation. All right, last thing quick, and then I'll look for questions. If you can't, if you're not sure who to talk to, make sure there's lots of options, hopefully in companies. Is there a manager you can talk to about a concern you have or document that you received or something? Legal department, maybe they have a person you can talk to and say, geez, I got this complaint from a line manager and this is really concerning. I have no idea if it's true. How should I proceed? And then you probably hopefully get some direction about that. Get a manager involved. Let's address what's going on here, what this person observed, what we can do about it. Sometimes there's designated reportees or ombudsman or people you can just write to, or hopefully not write, but talk to and say, boy, I think this is going on. I've observed this. And they're sort of anonymous, right? And they're going to keep your name anonymous. So that's one option, right? So, I tell you not to write things down, but you have to also have a way to report things. There's whistleblower options. Well, hopefully you're not a whistleblower yet because you're just trying to figure out what you just read, what you just saw, or whatever that. Or there may be a trusted confidant that you can talk to, right? Somebody that you work with and you go, geez, I didn't want to respond to this email, but this is really concerning to me. And maybe that person just sort of fleshing it out with them, unless it's privileged or confidential or would, obviously give up information about a person you shouldn't, then you shouldn't do. And then there might be company policies that address all these possible avenues for reporting and discussing issues. And hopefully those policies are helpful. So that's all I have. We only got 3 minutes left. So if you have questions, you can I don't see any questions in the question box on my machine. I don't know, Charlie, I don't know if you have any.
I do not see any, no.
Okay, all right. I just wanted to double check because we weren't sure if the presenter was giving them or getting them the questions or not. But anyway, hearing none, we're going to be done 2 minutes early. I appreciate you taking the time. If you have questions about any of this stuff we've discussed, because I know it's been a lot, and especially on the first session, a lot of broad brush concepts about sort of complicated things like privacy and confidentiality and privilege and things like that, give us a call. We're a resource for that very purpose. That's what we do. So thank you very much and have a great day.